Hi, guys. Welcome along to the new IRC podcast. We are back after a bit of a break. We understand the season has begun, but the long awaited, hugely anticipated podcast is back. People across the world going absolutely mental for it. So we thought we'll come back sooner than later. I'm joined by my trusted friends from the community. I've got Adil Chinoy, Maranella Baby. I've got Babaji, or Mr. Rama, and a new member to the community, Aditya, and a racing enthusiast, all in all. So that's four of us, and myself, Black Sheep. Welcome along, everybody. Hello.
Hello.
Hey everyone.
Okay. So we understand we're a bit late in jumping onto the bandwagon of everything that has already probably been spoken about this season. I think the last time we did the podcast, it was us discussing, predicting about how the seasons and the races and the calendar and the driver performances, etc., are going to pan out. In a way, it's good, I think, because we've seen 3 races already. We've seen some of our questions answered. How do you guys feel at how it's gone so far? 3 races in. We had 2 races in Austria and 1 in Hungary.
It's been a painful season for most Formula One fans. I think
If you say most.
When I say most, I'm talking about the Ferrari bandwagon of followers. But
Which is 99% of the fans.
exactly. But yeah, I think when we spoke last, we all expected Ferrari to have been sandbagging in testing, and we really felt that Racing Point would challenge them and not the other way around. And I think nowadays on a good day, Ferrari only on a very very good day do they challenge Racing Point. So Ferrari, I don't remember the last time they had such a torrid season. Do you?
Okay, so I see that you've jumped right in straight away. But I'm just going to make one point. When you said like most of the people, Ferrari fans, are not a bit upset, not looking forward to how this is going along. In a way, I'm kind of happy because from the point of view of us talking about different things, we have so much at hand. So I think Maranella has given a little bit of glimpse on what's to come, and there's going to be a lot about Ferrari, I'm pretty sure, given how things have kicked off already. But we're also going to touch upon, Racing Point, as Mara mentioned. We're going to mention, I think, roughly the races, reviews of the races so far, talks about changes to teams and who's moving where, etc., changes to team structures. Am I forgetting anything else? I think that's pretty much it. Or anything else that might be controversial, include that in there as well. So let's kick off. Okay, Ferrari, you started off with it. Anybody else? Babaji, go on. What do you have to say?
Yeah, Ferrari start. It's quite painful. Even as Seb said, even if you're not a Ferrari fan, you are a Ferrari fan. So it's painful to see the way Ferrari has begun this season in terms of how it relates to motorsport. It's pretty sad to see when Ferrari performs badly. I'm kind of hoping that they actually get the scene right before half of the year, maybe, because even the new upgrades didn't do shit in the Hungary. So I don't know, man. It's just painful.
This could be the season that Ferrari could be going into a slump. It's Formula One is a really hard sport. Anything can happen. Even the fastest teams in the sport could fall down to the back of the grid and be nowhere for a couple of years. We have a prime example in Williams right now. They have been having awful seasons for 5-6 years now. This Ferrari could be having a really bad time ahead.
That's a good point. I was going to touch upon that because I think Mara and Babaji started off with as if it's the approach to the doomsday, that all of F1 fans are just so disappointed. I understand we're all Ferrari fans here, or at least most of us are, if I'm not wrong. But then you're going to have seasons off and on where teams, certain teams are going to see that slump. But at the same time, would you, as a fan of the sport, not equally like to see another team outperform them, or a Williams slightly doing better, when teams with the Ferrari engine are struggling? We're going to touch upon Racing Point as well. I'm keeping that aside for now. But yeah, Racing Point too.
everybody deserves a chance to fight for the championships, and yeah, I don't think that Ferrari would be able to fight for the third spot, will be able to fight for this third spot in the championship this year, but it will be really hard for them. They brought their upgrades to Austria for the Styrian GP, but they crashed out and we couldn't see what those upgrades could actually bring them. So yeah, let's see what happens.
I think one thing that we obviously need to talk about or start with is what are the surprises from this season.
Correct.
So the first thing that obviously has struck us all, I think by extreme to an extreme amount, is of course Ferrari's pace, but we don't have to get into that. And I think I remember telling you this, Black Sheep. Over the last podcast, I did say that Alpha would be beaten by Williams, and I'm not saying it's happened comprehensively, but I do feel Williams have probably the third worst car, which is a compliment, by the way.
Okay, so there is a pinch of salt with that. You say that, but that's only true during qualifying. So in every race so far, they have still ended at the bottom, right?
If you look at the growth curve, very similar to Alpha in 2018. When you've got a really good driver in your team who's got a potential to be a world champion, they will pull your car up. And I think George Russell is certainly a top level driver, given the right amount of exposure and experience, or has the potential to become one. And it's got a very similar feel to the Williams this year that was there with Alpha in 2018 when they ended up being consistently in Q3. They and not just because Leclerc was driving, because even Ericsson pulled the car back up there. So the car does improve when you've got a good driver. So I think Williams is here to stay. It's not going to get any worse. It's only going to get better.
Well, yeah, no one's disputing that. They have certainly closed the gap immensely, isn't it? I think, like, on a like-for-like basis, they're like probably over a second closer than they were to the midfield than last year.
Yeah.
Why do you think the car is like suited for quali and then losing out in race pace?
It's got to be the tires, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's got to be management of tires, maybe.
Yeah. What do you
And
guys?
maybe they're not
Yeah.
sure. I don't know. Sometimes, like, obviously the other difference is in during race trim is that obviously you have to manage your tires and pit stops and strategy, but then you also have the fuel load. My hands up, knowing nothing about the mechanical or engineering side of how things work. But does that have any bearing on it? Do you think like a heavy fuel load affects how a car may perhaps handle worse than another car?
A heavy fuel load or a heavier car actually puts a lot of pressure on the tires, and it could be tough to managing the tires throughout the whole race.
I think certainly like a heavier fuel load means more grip on the rear. So cars tend to be more stable but slower at the start of the race, and more grip and more weight on the rear of the car means your rear tires do suffer a lot more. That's probably the reason we've seen a lot of cars with bad tire wear do better in quali than the race. But apart from Williams, I think there have been a few other surprises, especially in the midfield, especially further up the grid. What are some of them? I can't think of any offhand.
Surprises?
Well, unexpected performance boosts or losses.
Yeah. Go ahead, Babaji. What do you think?
I got a question though for you guys to kind of like start moving away from this Williams topic. I'm going back to Ferrari because that's really painful, and I need to discuss my feelings. Uh,
Okay, go ahead.
how much important do you think Ferrari is to the sport in 2020, and that they perform well? Since we all know how much FIA love Ferrari, so what do you think Ferrari should do this year at least to save face?
The question shouldn't be whether they're important to the sport this year in 2020. And it's obviously there is always a cycle where certain teams perform better and certain perform worse year after year. In general, obviously they're one of the most important teams, and the sport gets a lot of fans because of just Ferrari being part of the sport. So that's like I don't think there's anybody disputing that. But I don't mind if a team underperforms and comes back stronger. That's what makes the sport interesting, right? I'd love for them to come back
Yeah.
21 or 22 with the new regulations for them to just come out and just blast everybody off the grid.
Yeah, I mean, the world needs Ferrari to do well, but at the same time, I think when we were hoping for surprises, we were hoping for non-Mercedes domination. I think this season their car has just been, um, and whatever Ferrari would have done, even if they had come in with a strong package, I don't really see anyone competing with this season's Mercedes package. That package is
Yeah,
absolutely insane. Did you see Turn 4 in Hungary? That was almost flat out for.
It's astonishing that at the exit of like every single corner, there's no correction on the steering. There's no oversteer. There's like one clean, smooth turn of the wheel to turn in, and just coming out of the turn with no corrections made. It is astonishing, and you have to give it to them. I think it's so much more to do with how the team and the management are structured, if I dare say, and that's not really reflected on the Ferrari camp.
Certainly, I think you've hit the nail on the head, and I do feel this Mercedes car is going to go down as a legendary car, one of the greatest
yeah,
of all time. Right up there with right up there with the 1989 McLaren, the 2004 Ferrari. Is it's it's going to be it's going to be up there, and I think there's been no better racing car in history.
Yeah, I think Paul Di Resta, I heard during qualifying, say the same thing when he saw. I'm not sure if it was Bottas or Lewis was on board. He said it's probably the greatest and the most dominant car he has ever seen.
Even
Right.
when they correct the car, there's absolutely like no valid corrections. Like it's as if the car auto corrects itself. It's got traction control on it or something. I mean, it's just out of this world. That car.
Yeah. I know. Sorry, I know it was on topic of surprises, but and we all expected Mercedes to dominate, but the
mm,
quality of this season's car has surprised me.
Okay, let's move away to the third team. I think that we all want to speak about the Racing Point or the pink Mercedes. A lot of contentious points probably queuing up now, but um, Babaji, let's start with you because I think you were eager to queue this up. What do you think about there's questions about the legality of it, the stuff about the brake ducts, FIA finally coming out and saying, oh, by the way, we didn't really get around to checking the brake ducts altogether when we checked the car. It doesn't really reflect well on the FIA to first say, oh, the car is legal, and then to wait for a team to protest and then come out and say, oh, sorry, yeah, by the way, you're right, we missed that bit. It's just a shambles, isn't it?
I mean, FI is synonymous with inconsistency, so we shouldn't be surprised there. But true, everyone, as soon as the winter testing came out, everyone was already pointing fingers at Racing Point or Mercedes 2.0, that it was literally a carbon copy of last year's car. And many was actually hoping that it wouldn't perform as well, but it came and it just destroyed all hopes in Austria in the first GP with that qualifying. So, or naturally, I do feel if it would have been so illegal that all the teams would have protested long ago and actually would have had already been disqualified. So, in
yeah,
pertains to that, I think the car is legal already. So the brake ducts, we'll see after Silverstone what happens. Because yeah, the brake ducts look awfully similar as if they've just been lifted and put there. But yeah, the way the car's performing, I would also protest if I was a rival team.
Aditya, I think you're eager to go ahead. What's your point? What's your take?
I think that Renault's protest against the legality of the Racing Point car, I don't think it stands, because only Renault is protesting against Racing Point. McLaren and the other teams have come out and said that we don't see anything illegal in the car. They have done a great job, even if they have copied the Mercedes. They have done a great job, and you can't just blame another team for performing better than you.
Mara?
Yep. I certainly agree. I think imitation has been prevalent. You've seen Ferrari copy certain aero bits from McLaren in the past because that's something McLaren were always strong at. You've seen Mercedes copy Ferrari to an extent with the barge boards in 2018. You've seen copying throughout Formula One in since its inception. And
Yeah.
let's not forget the when rear wings first came out of the car, everyone copied them. It wasn't like, you know what, this is my IP and it belongs to me. And similarly with Racing Point. Now, if you had to ask for my honest opinion, I do not believe it was behind the scenes that it was 100% ethical or legal in the way they went about copying it. I do feel they got parts beyond the prescribed amount from Mercedes. For those of you who don't know, Racing Point do buy certain Mercedes parts like suspension and
Yeah.
apart from the engine, I mean, certain body parts from Mercedes as part of the contract, and that's legal. But I do believe they've gone a step further, but that's again just a feeling, and there's no way for anybody to prove that. This is just imitation done to a whole new level. And
But-
it makes sense. If you had to copy somebody, who would you copy?
I got
Okay,
a
so
question from our fans. I'm sorry to interrupt you, Black
yeah,
Sheep, but the question from our fans is: what are the disadvantages of actually teams copying each other, like having customer cars or such? Black Sheep, can you touch on that?
yeah. Let me come on to that. But just one point I was going to say to add to what Mara said. I think it's the rules are pretty clear in terms of how which parts you can share, you can buy, and then you have the listed and the unlisted parts. Um, so the rules are clear in that sense, right? And the implication here is that if the brakes are provided by Mercedes, then it will implicate Mercedes themselves because they would be not falling within the rules to be doing that. And I'm pretty sure Mercedes are not a team that will
Take
take that
such a
risk.
risk. Yeah.
Correct. Coming on to disadvantages of banning teams from copying, I think copying is good, because it gives fans an ability to see how different teams extract the most out of whatever innovation one team has done. Because it's not like you can just look at something, take a picture of it, put it on your car, and expect that to work as it does on whatever other team you've taken that from, because at the end of the day it's the whole car on the track racing, so the whole thing has to work together. It has to be a cohesive package on the whole, and it doesn't really always work at all the times, because if that were the case, then Racing Point wouldn't have been about a second slower than Mercedes with the same
You
engine.
know, when you copy something, you either hit the mark or you don't. It's very risky to copy something, but when it pays off, everybody feels happy. And yeah, just to what Black Sheep was saying,
So
it is interesting for the fans to see how the teams fare from copying the innovations done by other teams.
yeah, I mean, as long as it's within the rules, I'm all for it. I don't think it should be discouraged. I don't think there's any outright disadvantages unless they are literally just selling listed parts. That's kind of unfair advantage there in that case.
Next question: should Ferrari become a customer team of Mercedes? But never mind that. Um, I think in terms of the disadvantages of banning teams from imitation, that I think is the question. Um, it's a tricky concept. First of all, you want to see more unique designs. That's just an advantage I'm starting with. But I don't. But I think that innovation breeds more innovation. At the end of the day, if you do copy a component and it works with your aero package, different teams will find a way to make it work even better, and that will slowly evolve in time. If you take it back to the most probably popular imitation was the Lotus of the late 60s. That revolutionized the Formula One car design, and everyone today, or all cars, are a subsequent copy or a subsequent evolution or revolution of that car. We will begin or stop seeing that level of innovation and that level of ideation come through these teams if imitation is banned, because there's so many different implementations to one approach, and we'll not and while while copying may not seem like the most ethical word in the world, it's extremely important to Formula One and where Formula One progresses as a sport.
Well, I'll give a more recent example of the F Ducks. I think was it McLaren that came out with it first. I'm
Yeah, it was
not really
McLaren.
sure. And then every other team started to do their own version of it. And at the end of the day, it was basically essentially helping rear wing aero, or giving assistance, which basically turned out or evolved into what we have as DRS today. Because the FIA then agreed that, okay, this is something that every team seems to be doing. Let's come up with something that is across the board, unified for all teams, in making sure that they don't suffer from drag in a straight line.
Yeah.
Maybe we could like add element like IndyCar, where they have fixed aero. We could allow the teams to like be innovative in a certain part of the development of the car, but keep the rest of the elements static, like IndyCar. Probably you can
That-
have the team develop a chassis.
That's what's happening in 2022, right?
Yeah.
So, but they are adding, I think, ground effect back because that will allow to. That's the aero part, but still the chassis and the aero is all going to be different for each team, right?
Well, the
Um,
overarching point you brought up is basically, how much restriction do FIA allow? And we already have some of that. So different sports, so Formula One is going to have different restrictions that certain elements and certain things have to be similar across the board for every team. But then at the same time, you also want to encourage every team to come up with different innovations of their own. That's what makes the sport, the pinnacle of motorsports, right? So you can't really compare it to IndyCar or whatever else because they have their own sets of regulations.
All right. So
yeah.
let's just talk about uh, some of the GPs maybe. Mara, what do you think about the Austrian doubleheader?
I think it
In
was incredibly unique, considering it's the first time that I have seen. I don't know if you guys have know of an instance before, but we've seen a double header on the same track. I'm going to call it the Austrian GP. But it was interesting to see how the cars progressed, and I think we also saw a massive improvement in performance um, in terms of how the package was understood, because people could simulate identical situations and experiment with different approaches on the same vehicle, and that I think progressed very well to the Hungarian GP for some cars who got the time into understanding the packages. Like, I wouldn't expect Racing Point to have been that good in Hungary without a double header on the same track before, because they properly understood their package at the end of the double header. Sorry, were you looking for a race review or something? Because I was just taking the learnings away from the
oh,
Austrian.
No, fair point still.
Yeah.
We haven't heard from Aditya in a while. Let's cue him up.
Aditya, what do you think about the McLaren performance in the Austrian GP and the Styrian GP?
It was incredible to see McLaren, on the podium again after Brazil. Hamilton's penalty really helped Lando, and his pace on the last two laps. My God, it was incredible. You can't argue with his pace on the last two laps. I think Lando. Sorry, I think McLaren have come back, and I think their slump is over now. Getting the Mercedes engine next year, I think they will have a pretty good car, and they will fight for podiums and wins more frequently next year.
I've got a question for all of you now that the conversation has come to the double header and McLaren has been brought up. So, in both the instances where Norris did well and McLaren in general did well, Perez did well as well coming up the field. Do you think it's more of the car performance and the team? Because I personally think that if the team's done enough in terms of strategy, etc., then the next bit is onto the drivers, and you do have certain drivers who are excellent at just picking up the pieces if things unravel before them. The likes of Perez, Sainz does that as well. Lando, we've seen during the double header, picking up the pieces of whatever is going on, especially the second race in the Styrian Grand Prix. Do you
Yeah,
think it's not as much, McLaren, the car doing well, and it's more of okay, the driver on track is so aware and consistent in delivering that performance?
yeah. Talking about, let's go back to Ferrari because they had a rubbish car for the Austrian GP, and Leclerc with with his driving skills, he put a mediocre car on
True. True.
on the second step of the podium. I mean, you don't see that everywhere. It's incredibly hard to put a really bad car on the podium. It you know it goes down to the drivers in a lot of the time. Yes, the team plays a huge role in the team succeeding, and the mechanics, the pit stops, the strategies, everything. But on track performance is mostly dictated by a if even if you have a mediocre car, you put a really good driver in the seat, and you'll get good results.
True. I feel that McLaren, of course, the drivers are good, but they were amazing last year too in terms of science and Norris. So I do honestly believe that McLaren have come forward with a better package this year, which actually allowed Norris and the talents of the likes of Norris and Sainz to actually shine in Austria. But I'm still worried about what how they build the car. Probably it's more suited for lower downforce and high speed tracks because they didn't perform well in Hungary. So I don't know. I think it was a combination of both. Obviously, Norris and Science are gifted, but I think McLaren came with a better package this year.
Yeah, and I think that ties into a very relevant question that was asked from one of our important members in our community. If Albon didn't crash out and Lando finished on the podium, would we appreciate the McLaren package as much? And I think that ties back to a little bit to whether the driver deserves the laurels or does the team. Um, Black Sheep, why don't you address that question? I think you're asking most of the questions, so it's my turn to ask you one.
No, so I think I go back to the same point. So when I said I don't like if the car is good enough and the team get their strategy right, then I think the rest is then on the drivers. And you're absolutely right. If Albon hadn't crashed out or had the retirement or been spun around, any of those things, then I don't think we would have been talking about Lando coming up the field. Even during the last race, sorry, the second race at Austria, the Styrian Grand Prix, Lando was just right behind to pick up the pieces of Lance Stroll messing up his attempt to overtake Daniel Ricciardo. And if he had done that, and he was more than capable to with the car that he had underneath him. I mean, arguably the Racing Point was quicker than the McLaren. But if if Lance Stroll hadn't done that, then Norris probably wouldn't have been up there.
Yeah, when you see an opportunity in front of you, you take it. You just don't leave it. It is a very Formula One is a very cutthroat sport. You have to take every opportunity and that comes your way. You can't just leave everything to luck.
I think a very telling comparison to the point that I'm making was the Styrian Grand Prix when Perez just came through past Stroll and in his first attempt just went past Ricciardo and that's it, and kept climbing up the field hunting down Albon. And for the entirety of the race, Lance Stroll was just stuck behind Daniel Ricciardo, arguably in the same car.
Yeah,
True.
I agree. Baba, what are your thoughts? Do you think Norris deserves the?
I mean,
Oh.
Norris even if the podium would have gone to Albon, Norris would still finish P4, which is still an arguably his best result and one of McLaren's top results after the science podium in Brazil. So we would still consider them on a upward graph comparing to Racing Point, but that kind of changed in the Hungary ring where they didn't perform as much as they were expected to. So in Styrian Grand Prix because I believe Norris got lucky. He did think on his feet, but yeah, he would have not finished in so high had Lance not shit the bed.
So I think for me it's pretty straightforward. It's luck and the racing god's favor is part of Formula One. Lewis Hamilton probably would have had less than half the championships without it. Let's just say Timo Glock and leave it at that. But it's part of Formula One. You can't take anything away from it. But the good drivers, like Black Sheep said, are, and I think Aditya said as well, are always on their toes to jump at such an opportunity. And it's precisely why Norris is a top driver, why Charles Leclerc is a top driver. And yeah, I think whether it's Lance, I think one of the other questions, I'm just going to merge it into this one, whether Lance Stroll's P4 was an answer or anything like that. No, it was not. It's just a driver who's taken the opportunity, who's taken a good car and maximized the performance from it. And that's why you're paid millions of dollars a year, to be opportunistic, not to be a great driver. Well, great drivers taken for granted, but to be opportunistic.
I think this has neatly moved us on to, from covering off the doubleheader at Austria to the slightly contrasting race at Hungary. Not exactly the same results. For example, McLaren not delivering the same performance they did at Austria. Ferrari doing much better than they did in Austria. Mercedes being consistent, obviously, and the Racing Point again coming with a foot down with their stamp of we're here to stay, sort of a thing. What are your takeaways from Hungary, and how do you think that was? How do you think that contrasted from a track like Spielberg?
With Hungary, it was very contrasting in terms. Let me just talk about the Hungarian Grand Prix as a whole and not just midfield. I think the midfield the at the front, we had no doubt. We knew going into this race it would be an incredibly strong track for Mercedes. That had no surprises there. Oh, what I was expecting was a 1-2, especially after seeing Verstappen win it on the formation laps. Him doing his best imitation of Grosjean. But yeah, I think the driver of the day for me was definitely Verstappen, given the fact he held off a charging Valtteri Bottas. Absolute stellar drive, and just shows another example of a driver pulling out or putting the car in a position where it has no right being. Um, in terms of the midfield, I strongly feel that we saw a completely changed order. Teams bring updates, cars understanding their packages better, and I think we have more clarity on what the pecking order is.
Yep.
It's definitely Mercedes first. I'm going to say Red Bull Racing Point is the second fastest car on the grid, and that just
Yeah.
shows you Mercedes has a year's head start on development, given the fact that the 2020 Racing Point is the same as the 2019 Mercedes. But anyway, I think Racing Point is a clear second, and followed by Red Bull, McLaren, then Ferrari, and yeah, Vettel did well to pull the car up to P6.
What do you think about uh, Perez underperforming? Since we just covered that Lance actually had a good car, but Perez didn't do any much better in the other car, even though he's the much more experienced driver, podium driver.
I think it's just
See,
race circumstances. He just had a bad day.
yeah,
All
Yeah, I
right.
think
Perez
he
was
lost
just
at the
stuck.
beginning, at the start, and then he was a bit
Yeah,
stuck. He was able to charge through the field. I mean, he was making some good moves and looking for opportunities, which reflected
but
kind of the more conventional Perez as a driver.
Perez was just stuck behind a lot of drivers. There aren't many overtaking opportunities in Hungary. People do dub this circuit as Monaco without the barriers. He was just stuck behind. It is a low downforce track. He was just stuck behind the driver, a lot of the drivers, and he couldn't make a lot of moves and get up to the
The
top
order.
of the field.
Yeah, and now that you say that, Aditya, I do remember during the entirety of the first stint, if you guys remember, with Leclerc, the only driver being on the softs, he was holding up probably a train of 5 drivers behind him for a good
Yes.
8 to 10 laps, with Perez, the likes of Perez and Sainz included, whilst he was complaining about why the gods at Ferrari put him out on. I think we were all wondering why they did that on a soft tires. Having said that, I'm not really sure what went wrong in their pit stop with Vettel as well. Ferrari once again just not able to put everything together on the day when it matters.
He's just not working out for them at all. Everything they try to do just ends up messing up.
I was
they
so.
need to.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I guess they need to go back to the drawing board to figure out what's wrong, because Seb saved his own strategy by calling for the mediums. So
Hmm.
Ferrari look like a mess right now.
Yeah,
Did you guys?
Ferrari do need a new management right now. They are, in the dumps.
Go
yeah.
ahead, Mara.
No, I think that brings us on to one of the points that I was hoping to get a second opinion on. I personally am a huge fan of Matteo Binotto. I think he is the most intelligent person on the grid or in the paddock.
Yep.
And but at no point did I think he was a team leader in terms
Yeah,
of
he's
team.
not a
Yeah,
leader.
yeah.
Do you think Ferrari can risk losing him by getting another team principal in and demoting him, or do you think he's going to be switched out completely? Because I think it's going to be one of the two.
Yeah, Matia actually came out and said that he's being pressured from the outside, but it will be better for the team to demote him and bring a figurehead who can actually lead the team and take it back to the top of the podium.
I was just going to add to that. So Ferrari are extremely political, right? So they could bring somebody else in who's a complete outsider, or who's not on a personal relationship level with Binotto on the same page. And even if they have Binotto in the team as, say, the chief engineer or the chief designer or whatever, it's not going to work out if they don't get along well. So you need somebody who Binotto is comfortable in being the leader of the team, whilst Binotto does what he does best from behind the curtains.
Yep.
That's the only way it's going to work out.
To add on Black Sheep, Binotto is irreplaceable to Ferrari in terms of what he brings to the team. But in the current political scenario regarding Ferrari and how they're performing, it would be hard to not actually put some of the blame on him and hope for a fresh restart. So they're kind of backing up themselves into a corner into making a decision regarding Binotto.
Yes, I completely disagree with both of you in terms of what kind of person Ferrari needs, and um, in fact, I disagree 100%. I'm not even a bit leaning. So Ferrari have only worked when the management does not. Sorry, management isn't to be respected or liked at Ferrari. It never has been. None of the successful Ferrari teams have worked with everyone hugging each other and dancing in circles. They have only worked under fear. The most successful Ferrari era of all time, or one of the most Ferrari eras of all time, and I'm not talking about Schumacher's era. I'm talking about at the time where Enzo Ferrari was personally leading the team. In that era, Ferrari had 4 drivers for every Grand Prix. If you won the previous Grand Prix, that would still not guarantee you a seat at next weekend's Grand Prix. The people who were fastest on the day in practice, those are the 2 who would get a seat for the weekend race. Ferrari have functioned well when there's fear and not when there's harmony. Never,
But
as it's always been the case.
Isn't the question itself is that that's not working out for them? If you look at a team like Mercedes,
Yeah.
a well-oiled team with a clear focus, with everybody working together, and look at the results that brings.
So my point is this will eventually reach the same as you. Binotto should not be team principal; he should be the head of technical development. But I would disagree on the kind of person who needs to take up that position. So I do agree with you that he needs to go or needs to be demoted, but I disagree on the kind of person who needs to replace him.
Okay, let's move away from Ferrari. I think we've spoken enough. I think the only one thing I wasn't able to add to this when I brought up Vettel's pit stop was in that first set of pit stops. It was fantastic to see Williams being so eager to release Latifi that he had a puncture and contact with Sainz, and Ferrari just sitting there letting 4 cars pass them and just
had a
not giving
gap.
the green light. Yeah, they had such an opportunity, but it's just
It was a
that
bit
just
too
told
Yeah,
everything.
before we move away from Hungary, we just almost forgot about Haas. So we really need to give some time to Haas as to what a brilliant strategy they did and how Magnussen ended up P10. Could you add on that, Adil?
Yeah, I think I don't want to talk about Haas' performance. Of course, we all know that was a great strategy. I want to talk about they had P8 taken away from them or P9 taken away from them.
P9, yeah.
P9 taken away from them through a penalty, which was, according to me, complete rubbish. It was the penalty was, for those of you who don't know, that because the team instructed him with information before the on the formation lap, that's considered a driver aid, and that's not allowed before the race start. In the race, it's fine, and he got a 10-second time penalty as a result of that. And I think that's complete bullshit. If a race engineer is not allowed to tell a driver when to pit, I mean, what is Formula One? But do you guys share the same thought process as I do?
Let me just give a perspective on that. So essentially, they came out and said that the driver cannot be assisted. So what that implies is that when the race engineer told them to pit, they could have easily circumvented that penalty by the race engineer simply stating, "Guys, it's very wet. Do you think it's time for slicks?" And then Magnussen would have got the point, and he would have said, "Yeah, I think so." And then they would have made the call, and then there wouldn't have been any penalty. It's absurd.
Yeah.
Either way, positioning or not, what do you think, Aditya?
If a driver is being told to by the team to come into the pits and it's against the rules, I think yeah, it is justified to give them a penalty.
Okay.
Okay, let me get one more point. Do you think Haas will score any more points this season?
With a shit car, I don't think so.
Black
Well,
Sheep? Mara?
I think they will. They have a good chance. I'm not saying they will or they
Yeah,
won't, but the midfield is fairly close this year.
yeah, yeah.
Quite
Yeah.
I think
competitive.
it's they have a fair chance of scoring points.
Given the right circumstances, for sure.
Yeah,
Okay,
I think we've
we've covered
delved.
a lot.
Yeah,
We've covered a lot. I think we should talk about one of some of the controversial topics regarding Vettel and Alonso.
Yeah, I
What
think
do you
that's a
think?
good. I think we only have time for maybe one more point, which is Alonso. Huge news, a two-time Formula One world champion, and let's face it, one of the most loved drivers in the paddock, or who've been in the paddock in the last decade, is coming back to Formula One with Renault. Um, I think it's a great move. But what does that mean for Vettel? A four-time world champion, twice as good as Alonso. That's arguable. A lot of people are going to kill me for saying that, but he's left without a drive. What do you guys think?
wait around and find out next time we come back. I think that's going to take a long time, and I'm sure all of
Yeah.
us will have a lot of pertinent points to make about Vettel's potential drive for next season or the next season if he decides to stay out next season. But I, on the Alonso bit, I disagree with Mara. I don't think it's a great move to bring Alonso back. Um, I mean, Renault have a fantastic academy of young drivers coming up.
Alonso has technical expertise. He has been in the sport for a longer time than the younger drivers in the driver academy and Ocon. And Renault have actually come up and have performed quite well.
Yeah, and Black Sheep, I disagree with you. I don't think that they have. Formula One is not a breeding ground for drivers. It's the younger drivers and the academy drivers who need to get a chance. That's what Formula Two is for. That's what being a reserve driver is for. And this is something which Formula One's pivoted away from, and I do not like at all. The only 20 drivers who should be on the grid are the top 20 drivers in the world. Age.
Well,
Yeah.
that's exactly my point was. I mean, my point was that they have better talented drivers. I mean, it might be a controversial point, but they already have drivers able to come up to the F1 level within their driver academy, and somebody who hasn't driven with Renault for more than a decade, coming, giving a random chance to come into a team that he hasn't been a part of at all, doesn't understand the car. I mean, how long did it take for him to get accustomed to the team at McLaren and try to get used to the car? And as soon as he left, the environment at McLaren was completely different, with new blood coming in.
But in terms of Renault and the younger academy, Guan Yu Zhou still doesn't have license points. Lungard probably. But I think the issue with Renault was they are in sort of the public scrutiny. They were about to leave F1. So I feel that Cyril had to get in some person like to replace the star power of Ricardo, which is exactly suited in terms of Alonso. And he's not going to stay more than a couple odd seasons. So that gives them enough time to build their team and probably nurture the talent much more while simultaneously assuring their board of directors that they are competitive in F1.
Well,
So I think it's a perfect fit.
if it was about them not having the talent and that they had to call upon Alonso to come back, again, I disagree because there was Vettel out of a seat. It's a different question that Vettel may not have gone for Renault, but they could have just said, we're open to Vettel joining our team.
Yep.
Yeah, Vettel probably declined them because I don't think they are
That
as
was the
competitive.
response coming out. But I think about, and I think I'll just give my 2 cents on Alonso. Um, Alonso is a great driver, but I think of him a lot like I think of Jose Mourinho. I know it's a F1 to football comparison, but every time he leaves the team, he leaves it in a worse state than when he arrives. And I think the way yes, he's a great character to have in your team, but at the same time, he's a very negative person to have in your team. I think he does find a lot of problems with your car and with your with your process and multiple things. But in my experience, I haven't seen
Alonso,
the team in a good state.
yeah, Alonso is geared more thinking about himself more than the team. That's why he came very close with Ferrari on winning the championship. But he thinks more about himself than the team, and it just takes the whole team into a downward spiral,
Yeah.
and
Okay.
they aren't able
Sorry
to
to do this,
perform.
but we are out of time. Going to do a quick vote. Good or bad? It's actually Alonso to Renault. Good or bad?
Bad.
Babaji, what about you?
I'm personally happy just to see Alonso drive again. I don't think Renault is anywhere close to getting a podium.
Good or bad?
Good,
Okay.
very good.
Aditya?
I am in the middle. I don't know if he's good or bad. Let's just see what happens.
I'm going to say bad. I'm going to say bad. Even though I'm looking forward to seeing Alonso, it's bad for me. But I think that's actually, if I'm not wrong, I think that's all we have time for.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. I think there's a lot more to discuss, especially we haven't even got to the whole saga of Vettel losing his seat at Ferrari. But we'll pick it up the next time, and we'll have much more interesting and in-depth reviews of races coming forward as we go along the calendar. So that's it from us. That's me, Black Sheep, Marinella Baby, Aditya, and Babaji.